Shalom, and welcome back to Zalem Elohim Ministries. In this video, we're going to continue with our Isaiah series, and of course, we have gone up to chapter 9. So we're going to continue with chapter 10, 11, and 12. Once again, if you like these videos, please like, comment, and subscribe. This will help us with the algorithm in terms of getting this out to more people. And thank you for tuning in. So we will start with Isaiah chapter 10, and I'm definitely aware of the fact that there is a lot of kind of language about judgment. Isaiah has a lot of this. And so we see this again in Isaiah chapter 10. I'm going to try not to go through it in a great amount of detail because, again, there is a lot of language throughout Isaiah that does deal with judgment specifically, and some of it has some overlap. But you see in Isaiah chapter 10, verse 1 to 2, the prophet says, "Woe to those who make unrighteous decrees." And he calls upon those to give justice to the widow and to the fatherless, the orphan. And so there is a call in this passage for justice. There's a call to consider what Yeshua called the weightier matters of the law, the weightier matters of the Torah. And that is justice, and that is loving your neighbor, and loving God first, and then loving your neighbor. And so in this passage, it starts off with basically saying, woe to those who don't do those things. Woe to those who do not provide justice to the widow and to the orphan. Verse 4 talks about how Hashem's anger is not turned away yet for these things, but his hand is stretched out still. So we see that in verse 4. And we see, starting with verse 5, Hashem talking about how Assyria is his method of judgment. Of course, Assyria is the kingdom that attacked and took into exile the northern kingdom of Samaria. And Assyria is God's instrument, Hashem's instrument to bring judgment on the northern kingdom for their iniquity, for their turning away from the way of Hashem. And so this is talked about in verse 5 of chapter 10. In verse 6, he calls so in verse 6, he calls the northern kingdom an ungodly nation and against the people of wrath. And the northern kingdom, as the southern kingdom Judah had at this time turned away from serving Hashem, they had turned away to idols, they had turned away to doing evil, they had forsaken the Torah, and so they turned away from following Hashem in the way that he wanted them to. A nation that was hypocritical, a nation that ignored the Torah, that ignored God's standard for them. And so Hashem promises in chapter 10 that he's going to bring judgment against Assyria, as he would also do against Judah, although you would certainly be correct to say the judgment against Israel was harsher, and still to this day they are scattered around the world out of Hashem's sight. And so that is something promised here. Verse 15 and 16, Hashem basically says that Assyria was going to be proud. Let me just back up a bit here. So, when the Lord has performed all his work on Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, he will say, I will punish the fruit of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria and the glory of his haughty looks. For he says, by the strength of my hand have I done it. and by my wisdom, for I am prudent, and I also have removed the boundaries of the people and have robbed their treasuries. So it's talking about how the king of Assyria is going to exalt himself and is going to be thinking that he's all doing this by his own strength and by the strength of his God, which of course is not Hashem and is not a God at all. And in fact, this desolation of the northern kingdom and the desolation of Judah that is to come is a result of Hashem. It's not a result of any heathen god. These are not gods. These are nothing. These have no power other than as Hashem allows them. Well, it doesn't really allow them, but as Hashem allows these kingdoms to take the actions that he's calling them to take. But it's not because of the other gods that these kingdoms serve. In fact, those gods are not gods at all. So he talks in verse 15-16 about judgment against Assyria for their haughtiness, for their pride, for their arrogance. And you see this, in fact, with all of the kingdoms that Hashem has brought in judgment of the Jewish people or of the nation of Israel, is that once he's done the judgment, he then judges the nation if they have done something like going beyond what Hashem wanted them to do. And often they do. Often they're too harsh. And Hashem says, you know what? I was only a little angry, but these guys went too far. But he brings judgment on the Gentiles as well, the Gentile nations, because Hashem is a God of justice. He's a God that does not show favoritism. And so, despite judging his people for their sins, he will also judge the heathen nations as well. Verse 17, the light of Israel will be a fire. It will burn and devour the thorns in one day. Who is the light of Israel? Well, I submit to you, the light of Israel is the Mashiach, Yeshua. And when he returns, he is going to remove the thorns, and he's going to remove the briars, and he's going to call back the nation of Israel to the promised land. And he is not necessarily talked about here specifically in this way, but he's going to wipe away godlessness from Jacob. He's going to wipe away godlessness from the northern kingdom, and he's going to gather them back again. And so we see here talking about how the northern tribes are scattered into Assyria, but God is going to call them back. He is going to gather them again. That has not happened yet. And so this is likely a future thing. Verse 18-20, a remnant from Israel will return to God. Verse 27, the burden of Assyria will then be taken away. So a remnant are going to return and are going to serve the Lord and are going to return to the promised land. Verse 25 talks about the indignation and how this will be brought to an end. This likely refers to the time of Jacob's trouble and the fact that there will be a beast or a man of sin, and he will be on the earth and he will be persecuting the righteous. But Hashem, in the fullness of time, through Mashiach, through Yeshua, is going to bring an end to that period of time. And so, at the end of that time, there will be an end of the tribulation for the remnant that have been called back. I'm going to continue with chapter 11 and 12 because they are to some extent related to chapter 10. And so they all fit quite well together. That we continue with chapter 11. And this talks about the seven spirits of God that are mentioned, that are going to be spirits through which the Messiah is going to govern. And so the Messiah operates in these seven spirits of God that are mentioned here. So it says, there shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. This, of course, is the Messiah. The Mashiach, Yeshua, is referenced here. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. So, Spirit of the Lord, wisdom, understanding, counsel, might, knowledge, and the fear of the Lord. 7 spirits that are mentioned here. Now, these are not separate spirits in the sense of separate beings. These are separate attributes, aspects of Hashem's spirit, of the Spirit of God, of the Ruach. It's just 7 different aspects of it that are referenced here, but these are going to be the spirits of the Mashiach. And the Mashiach is going to function in these elements. His delight is in the fear of the Lord, and he shall not judge by the sight of his eyes, nor decide by the hearing of his ears, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his loins, and faithfulness the belt of his waist. And so we see here a description of the Mashiach and what he's going to function in. So when he returns to establish the kingdom of David, and of course Yeshua did already function in these 7 spirits, but he will function in them again when he returns. And his delight will be in the Lord. His delight will be in following the commandments of God and in pleasing the Father. And so that's something that will be part of the Messianic kingdom. And he's not going to judge by the standards of the world. He's going to judge by God's standard, by Hashem's standard. He's going to judge righteously. He's going to give justice to the poor and to the oppressed. That is something in our world we do not see. You can see that in a certain form. There is certainly an aspiration that we would have justice in our society. That is a laudable thing. We should absolutely seek justice in our society. And justice in our society comes through applying principles of the Torah. However, we will not see the full fulfillment of that. We do not live in a perfect world. We do not live in a world where justice is absolute. But in the Messianic age, when Yeshua returns, we will live in such a world. Justice will be made by Hashem. It will be made by God through the Mashiach, and not by men, and not by men's standard. No matter how good the government may be, and many of us are privileged to live in a democratic society where Torah principles are part of the legal system. I certainly am myself. But the reality is, even with all of that, it is still not in accordance with God's true justice that will be manifested in the Messianic age. And so that's what this is talking about here. I talked about that already. So this is in reference to what is going to take place at the second coming, that the Messiah will judge in righteousness, and he will bring justice through the 7 spirits of God that are referenced in verse 1 to 2. Verse 6 to 8 talks about the results of the Messiah's reign, the Mashiach's reign. The wolf will also dwell with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the young goat. The calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. This is talking about an end to the effects of the fall of man, the effects of the sin nature, of the evil inclination, which has also manifested in the animal kingdom, where animals eat each other, where they are beasts of prey, and where there is exploitation in the animal kingdom. In the Messianic age, that will not take place. And animals are going to be as the nature that they had when Hashem created them. And the lion and the lamb will lie down together, and a little child will lead them. Meaning there's not going to be any reason for a little child to fear the lion, because the lion is going to have its true nature, the nature it was made with before corruption came into the world. So one of the questions that have been raised is whether, in fact, in the age to come, in the Messianic age, dominion will be given back to humans again over the animal kingdom. And I would suggest through the Messiah, through the Mashiach, the answer will be yes. that man will have dominion over the world again, and will have there will not be the same fear and the same predatory nature that exists today, exists now. I could go into what dominion means and how that refers to carrying over the creation, but we'll leave that for another video because that's a bit beyond what we can cover today and a bit beyond what Isaiah is talking about. But this is the promise of how the Messianic age will be. That there will in fact be a lion lying down with the lamb. It does not say so here necessarily, but there's other places where it talks about how the nations will lay down their weapons and there will be peace, and they will not learn war anymore. Will not learn war. It doesn't say they won't fight. It says they won't even learn war. It won't enter into their mind. Because these types of things are a result of the evil inclination that comes from the fall of Adam, comes from the fall of man. And in the Messianic age, when Messiah has finally put an end to the evil inclination, that will not occur to people anymore. It certainly will be a better time. It will be a glorious time to live in. When Yeshua reigns in righteousness and justice. So that's verse 6 to 8. You've seen verse 10 talk about the root of Jesse. It says he will stand as a banner to all people. For the Gentiles shall seek him, and his resting place shall be glorious. And so we already see that the Gentiles seek Yeshua the Messiah, many of them, not all of them, and seek to serve him. And he has already been lifted up as an ensign amongst the nations. Talks about as well in verse 10, gathering of Judah. It also continues with the removal of the enmity, the dissension, the hatred, the discord between Ephraim and Judah, between the northern kingdom and Judah and the southern kingdom. This, of course, suggests that, in fact, there is going to be a regathering of the northern kingdom as well as the southern kingdom. And we largely know today where the southern kingdom is. The Jewish people are the southern kingdom. But the northern kingdom is still somewhat of a mystery. But Hashem, in the last days, before the Messianic Age, is going to regather the nations of the northern kingdom, tribes of the northern kingdom together. And he's going to remove the enmity between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And together they will fight enemies in Edom, Moab, and Ammon. And they will impose the justice of Hashem in the world. That is the blessed promise of this chapter. And then we continue with chapter 12. Verse 1 talks about comfort for the people of Judah. And this particular chapter of Isaiah is actually just a praise. The praise of Judah, the praise of Israel for Hashem and for what he has done for them. In that day you will say, Lord, I will praise you though you are angry with me. Your anger is turned away and you comfort me. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. For God the Lord is my strength and song. He also has become my salvation. Therefore with joy will you draw water from the wells of salvation. God is our salvation. God is our refuge and strength through Messiah. And, of course, the word for salvation is Yeshua, is the name of the Messiah. And he has brought salvation through his atonement, through forgiveness of sins. And he will bring all aspects of salvation, not just the aspects of saving our soul. He will make an end to the evil inclination. He will establish Hashem's justice in the earth. And he will complete the work that started 2,000 years ago. But this is a praise, verses of praise for Hashem being our salvation. Israel and Judah will know that Hashem is their salvation. Israel and Judah at this time will know that Yeshua the Mashiach has made a way for them to be reconciled to God. We see judgment brought for failing to follow the Torah, for failing to follow, in fact, the weightier matters of the Torah, which are not just outward observance. It's the observance of the heart. It's whether you love your neighbor. It's not to say that, all of us have a ways to go in implementing these things in our lives. All of us have a ways to go to be more like Messiah, to be more like the Torah requires. But we're to be on that journey. And so that is what we start with, is the judgment on the northern tribes that's brought by the kingdom of Assyria because of idolatry, because of sin, because of iniquity. Then we see God's promise of the Messianic Age, where Messiah will govern in justice and righteousness, and will bring justice to Judah and to Israel and to the nations. And of course, as a result of that, it will be a time of praise for Judah, for Israel, and for the nations, for the mighty work that Hashem has done amongst them. And that's the end of the passage for today. I hope that it gives you hope for the future. We live in times that in many cases have darkness. We live in dark times. We live in times when evil sometimes seems to be winning in our world. But do not be afraid, but put your trust in Hashem. Put your trust in his Mashiach, Yeshua, because Hashem will bring justice. Hashem will bring righteousness. Hashem will make an end to the evil inclination, and he will bring salvation to us. Thank you for watching and for listening to this study of the book of Isaiah. I hope that you will tune in the next time, and until I see you again, shalom. Have a great week.